Joe Goldberg's journey in You has been nothing short of a roller coaster, but in Season 5, his fate finally caught up with him. The man who spent years justifying his obsession with women and believing he could escape the consequences of his actions has reached his final chapter. But did he really get what he deserved? Was the way he ended truly the justice we were waiting for? Stick around, because we're diving deep into Joe's twisted fate, and trust me, it's a lot more complicated than you think. The moment the mirror cracked. What if the mask you wore all your life finally refused to fit? Joe Goldberg stood alone in a penthouse lined with mirrors. Not one showed a man he could recognize. For the first time in his life, he wasn't hiding. He was exposed. The media had labeled him the gentleman monster. Photos of Beck, Love, Marianne, and countless others flickered across every screen. Their stories had found voice. Bronte had seen to that. In her, Joe met not just resistance but poetic reckoning, someone who refused to be reduced to a story he could control. But it wasn't just exposure that unraveled him. It was the terrifying realization that his fantasy of being the romantic hero had turned grotesque. His inner monologue, once self-soothing and persuasive, now echoed like a jury's verdict. As Bronte stepped into that final room with a gun in her hand, Joe saw, not fear, but a reflection of every woman who had ever tried to survive him. But Joe wasn't finished yet. Because even with a gun pointed at his heart, he still believed he could win. The last seduction attempt. Can you manipulate someone who has already lived through hell? Joe's eyes shimmered with crocodile tears as he whispered, "You don't want to become like me." His voice cracked, his tone deliberately softened. Not because he felt remorse, but because he'd perfected this theater. The soulful eyes, the trembling breath, the performance of vulnerability. Bronte didn't move. She had watched the footage, read every police file. She knew that behind those eyes lived a man who killed for love and called it devotion, who stalked, caged, and rewrote women's identities like bad fanfiction, always casting himself as the misunderstood lead. Joe reached forward, hoping to hold her wrist, to reclaim control with the barest touch. Bronte's answer? A single, bone-chilling sentence. "You don't get to script my ending." And just like that, Joe realized. She had stopped seeing him as a man. She saw him now only as what he truly was. A pattern, a predator, a pathology. The shot that silenced the fantasy. When a bullet speaks louder than a lifetime of lies. When Bronte fired, it wasn't in panic. It was precise. But she didn't aim for the heart. Not yet. Not the head. No, Bronte aimed where Joe's self-image lived. In his manhood, in his control, in the anatomical symbol he had weaponized in silence for years. The shot rang out like a liberation cry. Joe collapsed. Not dead, but broken in a way he hadn't imagined possible. There was no cinematic death, no tragic final breath. Just blood, silence, and the end of Joe Goldberg's mythology. But justice, as Bronte would soon learn, rarely ends with a single gunshot. The internet devours the devil. What happens when your downfall goes viral? Joe once believed the internet was his playground, a place to stalk, to watch, to gather. Now it was his crucifixion. Bronte uploaded every journal, every recording, every hidden video he had buried. Reddit threads dissected his pathology. TikTok users reenacted his most manipulative phrases. He was no longer misunderstood. He was now the poster boy for covert sexual violence and romanticized abuse. The world didn't mourn him, it memed him. And Joe, once the narrator of his own myth, had no voice left to spin the narrative back. But one video Bronte didn't release. Not yet. The one where Joe confessed something no one else knew. The ghosts he couldn't kill. What if your victims never left you, not even in the dark? Prison was isolation. But for Joe, solitude meant confrontation. He tried to journal. The words betrayed him, tried to sleep. The ghosts invaded. Beck, Love, Candace, even 40. They didn't scream. They stared, unblinking, judging. Joe had always imagined them forgiving him in some twisted dream logic. But here, in the dark of a prison cell, they were not characters. They were consequences. And Joe, for the first time, couldn't rewrite the script. One night, Joe woke up screaming. Not from guilt, but from absence. Because one ghost had gone silent. Bronte. the woman who refused to be a chapter. What's more terrifying than revenge? Indifference. Bronte disappeared from the public eye after the trial. She refused interviews, book deals, or brand partnerships. She didn't want to be famous. She wanted to be done. Joe waited, expected letters, messages, closure, something. But there was none. And that's when it hit him. Bronte wasn't like the others. She hadn't just escaped. She had left him behind, erased him. And for a narcissist like Joe, erasure was worse than death. But the silence had a purpose, and it wasn't forgiveness. The revenge of the women who lived. What if justice is a relay race, passed from one survivor to another? Kate had once believed in redemption. Nadia believed in truth. Marianne believed in survival. Now they believed in each other. Behind closed doors, they started a foundation, WHOA, Women Holding Off Abusers. Their first campaign? Releasing the Joe Files, an uncensored archive of every woman he had targeted. It wasn't about him. It was about them, their voices, their healing. And as Joe sat in his cell watching the launch video, his image pixelated behind theirs, he wasn't the focus anymore. He was just context. A discarded villain in a story no longer about him. But then came the letter. One final twist. A name he never expected to hear again. The letter from baby Henry. Can a child hate a parent he's never known? The letter was handwritten, delivered through legal channels, signed by a 12-year-old boy, Henry Quinn Goldberg. I know who you are, it began, and I know who you are not. Henry had grown up with stories, not fairy tales, but testimonies. About love, about Joe, about what he was meant to become, and what he chose not to be. You don't know me, Henry wrote, but I'm everything you're not. I'm not broken. I'm not yours. I'm free. Joe read the letter again and again, hoping to find a mistake. A hint of love. There was none. Joe folded the letter carefully, and then tried to eat it. The whisper in the walls. When no one fears you anymore, who do you become? In prison, Joe became infamous. At first, the guards called him Romeo Reaper, the inmates too. But time moved on. New monsters emerged. Joe faded. He tried teaching literature, no one listened. He wrote a memoir, no publisher answered. And then, one day, he heard a whisper in the walls. Not literal, but from deep inside. No one cares anymore. And that was the punishment. Not death, not pain. Irrelevance. Joe Goldberg had lived for attention, for narrative dominance. Now he was just background noise. Until a knock came at his prison cell. A woman, a familiar face, holding a folder. The final confession. What's worse than being caught? Being understood. Bronte returned one last time. No press, no cameras. Just her, a tape recorder, and a question. Why did you really do it? Joe stared at her, then smiled. And for the first time, told the truth. Not the romantic lie, not the orphan trauma, not the "but I loved them" excuse. He said it plainly. I liked the power. I liked making women feel small. I liked that I could. And Bronte, eyes full of silent fury, pressed stop. That recording would never air. It wasn't for the world. It was for the archive, for the women who needed proof, for the girls still learning what monsters sound like. Bronte stood up. You finally told the truth, she whispered, but you're still not the main character. She turned and walked away, and Joe, left behind, realized that this time, there would be no season 6. And that's a wrap on Joe Goldberg's dark and twisted story in You. His fate may have been long overdue, but did it really deliver the justice he deserved? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you won't miss out on any of our upcoming deep dives. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. See you in the next video.